Our first panel, and from now on witnesses will be in panels, is Tim Whitesell, President, Association of the Towns of the State of New York. Dominic Frongillo, Deputy Town Supervisor, Town of Caroline, and Carl Chipman, Supervisor, Town of Rochester. We've also been joined by Assemblyman Bill Coulter. And I will ask all of you now who are testifying as panels to please state your name before you testify so that we know and the transcription camera knows who is who. Welcome. Thank you. Choose among yourselves who would like to go first.
Good morning, Chairman Sweeney, Gottfried, and Levine, and honorable members of the respective Assembly committees. I am Tim Whitesell, Supervisor of the Town of Binghamton and Broome County, and I'm also serving as the President of the Association of Towns of the State of New York. I appreciate having the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the revised regulations on high-volume hydraulic fracturing. My testimony today is not about whether natural gas drilling should or should not take place, nor am I here to evaluate the advantages or disadvantages of natural gas development in New York State. The Association of Towns takes no position on whether or how natural gas should be developed. What I will focus on is the ability, right, and opportunity for town officials to participate in the permitting process, given that natural gas drilling will unarguably have various impacts on towns. In practice, many, if not most, issues associated with the natural gas development will relate to both the regulation of the industry and the health, safety, and general welfare of the community. Local road usage, water supply and withdrawal, noise and light considerations, and emergency response plans all directly involve and impact local communities, and yet also relate to the operation of the natural gas industry. Because the DEC is no way accountable to the residents who must live with its determinations, there is little inducement for it to address the specific concerns of the local residents on these issues. The revised proposed regulations do not afford local government officials any meaningful involvement in the permitting process. In fact, aside from notifying the town supervisor that an application has been filed and allowing for a public comment period on limited issues, the regulations do not include local officials in any step of the process. Yet local government officials are the ones who will be called upon to address the impacts natural gas drilling have on towns and its residents of these local governments will ultimately have to live with the continuing impacts associated with oil and gas drilling. That is why the regulations on natural gas drilling and high-volume hydraulic fracturing should grant local governments the right to participate in the permitting process, as local government officials are directly accountable to the residents and have the responsibility to address their concerns. The determinations made by the DEC in the regulatory and permitting process do not displace the right and responsibility of locally elected officials to consider and address the health, safety, welfare, comfort, and convenience of the public, who must live with the impacts of natural gas operations. Just because the state has exclusive authority to regulate the operations and activities of the oil and gas industry does not mean that it must or should do so without contribution from local governments in the geographic areas most affected. To demonstrate my point, I will direct your attention to the proposed regulations regarding transportation plans and emergency response plans. Natural gas drilling is expected to create a tremendous amount of truck traffic on local roads. The majority of the local roads are not designed for such an intense volume of traffic and are unable to accommodate it. To mitigate the impact, the revised proposed regulations require a transportation plan and encourages a road use agreement between the well operator and the municipalities. Yet local officials could effectively be excluded from the development of the transportation plan, creating the potential for the issuance of a permit with a transportation plan that is inconsistent with local road regulations. Regulations should grant local government representatives an active role in the development of the transportation plan and further require that the transportation plan be consistent with all road use local laws, regulations, permits, and agreements adopted and required by the municipality. Permits should be conditioned upon the continued compliance of the local road regulations and road use agreements, and the regulations should allow for the suspension of previously issued permits if the condition is violated. The traffic and road impacts on local communities will be among the most immediate, apparent, and costly impacts on local governments associated with the drill site, and local governments are primarily responsible for mitigating these impacts. Without stronger regulations to accomplish this, local government officials are concerned about their ability to adequately and effectively protect their roads. The proposed revised regulations are also deficient in preparing local governments and local emergency response teams for dealing with emergencies that may arise on a well site. While the applicant must prepare an emergency response plan to be kept on site and filed with the DEC, neither the county nor the town, city, or villages whose emergency response teams will be most likely the first to respond to these scenes of an emergency are entitled to a copy of the emergency response plan. The concern was raised in initial regulations and was addressed by the department in its responses to the comments on the regulations and the RDSGIS. In response number 6139, the department stated that it does not agree that notifying towns and villages of the contents of emergency response plan is necessary. Similarly, in response 3755, the department stated that devoted staff within the department will serve as a resource for local citizens and governments, and that the local agencies interested in emergency response plans on file with the department should contact the department for assistance. Local government emergency response teams who will be putting their health and safety on the line to respond to emergency situations at a well site deserve more information and access to the emergency response plan than the local citizen, and should not have to contact DEC for staff assistance with the emergency response plan. The first responders in these local communities will be the first to arrive at the scene of any emergency, and as with any emergency, the better informed the emergency teams are, the more effectively they can control the situation. The failure to provide local first responders with emergency response plans not only limits their abilities to effectively provide response to the emergency, it compromises the safety of the volunteers risking their lives to respond to the emergency. There is no reason why, in this stage of interoperability, mutual aid, and coordinated responses, the local emergency response team should have less than the complete and accurate information that is necessary to respond to a disaster in a safe, timely manner. Therefore, these plans and every amendment and modification made thereto should be provided to emergency responders at all levels of government without exception. While the regulations attempt to address concerns that will be common to all the applications and permits for high-volume hydraulic fracturing, the specific impacts associated with particular wells will be unique to the town to which this well is located and to the residents who live there. And while the New York State DEC is charged by law with addressing the common impacts through the SGIS and regulatory process, the local officials are equally mandated to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its residents, to provide necessary infrastructure to ensure overall quality of life to their residents. The regulatory framework for drilling permits provide a terrific opportunity to establish a cooperative and comprehensive permitting scheme where state regulatory agencies and local governments work in tandem to address multitude of impacts that natural gas will have on local communities. Unfortunately, the revised proposed regulations fall short of this mark by affording local governments no more than a perfunctory role in permitting process, leaving more than that enjoyed by the average citizen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, I can go next. Great. Honorable members of the Assembly, thank you very much for holding this hearing and for inviting me the opportunity to testify. I applaud your leadership on this issue and your Assembly written letter to the Governor 2 days ago. I represent the town of Caroline in Assemblywoman Lifton's district. We're very close to the ground zero for this issue. We're on the watershed divide of the Susquehanna and the St. Lawrence, and half of our land, over 55%, was leased for drilling. Last year, though, we saw an unprecedented grassroots uprising in Caroline that made national news, citizens delivering a petition signed by half of all registered voters in the town of Caroline urging our town to ban fracking. It was the largest petition in our town's history, and when the council at that time voted down taking any action in an election which typically goes 50-50, voted 2-1 to vote out the incumbents and put in candidates that would protect our town. We'd never seen anything like it. And on September 11th of this year, we banned gas drilling in the town of Caroline, joining 150 municipalities across the state in passing bans and moratorium. I'd like to note, however, that the impacts of fracking don't respect municipal boundaries, and even those municipalities that have protected ourselves are still subject to impacts of water contamination, air pollution, truck traffic, pipelines, and socioeconomic impacts that don't respond to respect municipal borders. We're bordered on by three towns in Tioga County. Local elected officials, as Tim said, are on the front lines of this issue. I'm also here to represent elected officials to Protect New York, which is a nonpartisan, geographically diverse group of local electeds across the state, representing 565 mayors, council members, county legislators, trustees from every single one of New York State's 62 counties in New York. We represent collectively over 13.4 million New Yorkers, which is 69% of the state's population. We're nonpartisan. We have Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, working families, Green parties all signed on to our letter, which is calling for a continuation of the moratorium on fracking until it's proven safe for all New Yorkers. And that prior to making any decision on fracking, at a minimum, the state must do a comprehensive health, a socioeconomic impact statement, as well as cumulative impact assessment. I will note that we've consistently reiterated requests to meet with the governor since June 4th, but have not heard a response to meet with the governor, and we're concerned about his refusal given his meeting with the Independent Oil and Gas Association and other pro-fracking proponents. We're concerned about that. Responding to the proposed regulations before us, I'd like to address a couple of points. First is the 30-day comment period, which was held in the midst of the holidays, as you know, stifles public participation on an already confusing and backwards process and is inadequate to allow local governments to respond to these regulations. While designed in part to protect us, our monthly meeting schedule of most local governments operating under the state's own open meetings law precludes us from having adequate time to study these regulations and then have meetings to respond to them at all during during national holidays and to comment on the impacts of these regulations on the citizens that we represent. The second is that the release of the revised regulations prior to the state's health review raises serious concerns for us as whether politics rather than science is driving this process. This is no time for secrecy and exclusion of medical and scientific experts or the public on an issue which affects us all and for which we're all paying for. Elected officials to Protect New York urges the governor to abide by the same principles of transparency that we as local government elected officials ourselves are required to abide by and are calling for full public disclosure and participation in the health department's review. In a state of the state yesterday, Governor Cuomo unveiled Open New York to support government transparency in online access to government data, and we are encouraging, or applaud the governor for this move and encouraging the governor to start with releasing all public documents, data related to the DEC's fracking environmental health review. Third, elected officials to Protect New York is concerned about the inadequacy of these regulations in addressing the impacts of fracking on the local municipalities. Among many other areas, including truck traffic, which ruts our road, damages bridges, transportation of hazardous waste, putting our first responders at risk, well casing failures, crime and rental prices, forcing out vulnerable families, destabilization of housing prices, threatening mortgages, boom-bust economy that drives out businesses and destroys our tourism base, fragmentation of our towns with pipelines, access roads, and compressor stations, and a 24-hour industry which destroys our rural character, none of which are fully and adequately addressed in the revised regulations. Fracking would also release massive amounts, as we talked about earlier, massive amounts of methane, which is 105 times more powerful than CO2 at trapping heat in the atmosphere over 20 years. And particularly for local governments, fracking will undermine our local government efforts to reduce our own climate impacts. Tompkins County Planning Department, for example, estimates that just one 8-well pad will release more climate pollution over its operational life than our entire Tompkins County population of 100,000 people, all the household emissions in 1 year. Also, New York State's Climate Action Report, Climate Action Plan report, which, as you know, the governor has yet to move forward on, sets ambitious targets of cutting greenhouse gases 80% by 2050, but the environmental review and these regulations fail to answer or address how fracking in New York will affect our ability to meet those targets. And as a member of that Climate Action Plan's advisory panel and attendee of 4 UN climate conferences, I know that to avoid further climate disasters like we've seen this year, even here in New York, we must immediately reduce our climate impact and emissions, not increase them. And we must understand the climate impacts of fracking before making a decision. But I'll add that just this year on January 2nd, if you haven't seen it yet, the journal Nature reported on a new study by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which found shockingly high rates of methane leakage from Utah gas fields. The previous recorded emission rates were 4%. There's 9% of gas production leaking into the atmosphere. This utterly repudiates any climate benefit to gas. These are just a few of the concerns that local government officials across New York State have about these regulations, and I thank you and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Chipman?
I'd like to thank Chairman Sweeney and honorable members of the Assembly for this opportunity to speak about hydraulic fracturing. My name is Carl Chipman. I'm the supervisor of the town of Rochester, not the city of Rochester. We're the original Rochester. We began in 1703 when we were incorporated. We're located in Ulster County. We're right on the edge of the Marcellus Shelf, nestled between the Shonga and the Catskill Mountains. Part of my town, you could say, would be safe, a very, very tiny part. That's part that belongs to the Catskill watershed, and since it supplies New York City with water, that's considered safe. But the other 98% of my town would be open for fracking. Last year, we passed a ban on the exploration and extraction of natural gas and oil in order to prevent fracking in our town. Even though we did that, I still don't feel we're safe. When we take a look at air and water pollution, it doesn't recognize geopolitical boundaries, and we're not that far from the southern tier where they plan to initially start this process. Also, something that very, very much scares me, and maybe I will castigate the legislature of this state, you pass something called compulsory integration, which means if a certain percentage of leaseholders, people lease their property out in an area, then everybody else has to, which I think is completely wrong. It's a violation of home rule, and I really do think it's an infringement on individual property rights. But I'll move past that. I really am not here to speak about the obvious air and water concerns. I'd like to look at things at a little more practical level. The process itself, I think, is very flawed. We're discussing regulations when we still haven't had a proper review of the health impacts of fracking. Quite honestly, that's like putting the cart before the horse. You know, usually, and I know when I pass laws and rules, I want to look at the impacts. What am I trying to do? Well, you need to have all your information. It's quite obvious that we don't have all the information. The regulations, the revised regulations, I believe, were released on November 29th, one day before the November 30th deadline on the study of the health impacts. This automatically granted like a 90-day extension period. Very, very creative there. And then on December 3rd or 4th, a 3-member panel gets to review the health report from the Department of Health. I believe they're allotted a tremendous amount of time, like 25 hours per person. I really see a problem with this process. And also, I really believe that maybe I shouldn't even be sitting here at this time, and neither should all of you. Moving on to that, we look at the comment period. Public comment period was scheduled from December 12th to January 11th. Right in the middle of that, we have the holidays. So that takes out at least a third when you take a look at everything. Local governments, well, at the end of the year, we're busy trying to finish up our budget and transfer funds and do our end of the year things. And then in the first week of January, we've got to rush and try to do a reorganizational meeting, and that ties us up. So you have 1,500 pages of regulations, and where are we going to have the time to dissect all this stuff, get the public in and talk to them, and not violate open meetings law? It's impossible. It's almost like somebody didn't want us to comment on it. Now, I went on the DEC website a few days ago, and up to then, there was like 890-something comments received so far. Now, compare that when the revised S-Geist came out, there was over 80,000 comments. Boy, and that's a big difference there, and I think we really have a problem with that process. Now, to move on to a few more mundane things. Mr. Whitesell did mention quite a few things about traffic and roads and road agreements. Here's the problem. Each well, you get 7,000 truck trips. Now, my town I would say my town's like the average town. I don't feel it's average, it's special to me, but the truth is that when we look at roads, I have like 12 miles of state road in my town, 18 miles of county road, and 122 miles of town road. Now, my town roads are designed for minimal traffic, smaller vehicles. Each well, that's 7,000 trips per well. Now, I can tell you when Route 209, that's my main road in my town, when that goes down because it floods, because New York State DOT hasn't seen fit to raise a bridge there, so the water doesn't go over it, so it gets flooded at least twice a year. So then they have to go on my back roads. So 1 or 2 days of traffic on my back roads, and the shoulders are all ripped up. It's dangerous for people. I live on one of those roads, and I take my child to the bus stop. I don't let them get on the bus. I mean, people are flying. You have all these people that are now delayed, and they're not happy. And those roads are designed for 35 miles an hour, and of course they want to go 55 miles an hour on those roads. And it's a dangerous situation. Well, this is what we're facing with our roads. When we're going to have fracking in our towns. It's not going to happen on your main road right in downtown in your commercial district. It's going to be off in the middle of nowheres there. Now, we can look at some of the studies from other states like Texas. Well, Texas is very different, okay? They have straight roads. In my town, we're mountainous. Everything curves around. We've got blind curves. I can just see one of these heavy water trucks in a school bus coming around a blind curve, and it makes me cringe when I think of what might happen there. So some people say a road maintenance agreement with the gas company. Well, the problem is it's like dancing with the devil. Here we are, we're a little town, okay? We're not prepared to negotiate with these high-level lawyers. They have a lot more money than we do, and we can't actually spend that money. We can't just go out and build roads. We have a 2% property tax cap that we have to worry about. And let me tell you something, there is no exception for capital projects that the schools have. Municipalities have to stay under the cap. So what are we going to do? And even if we wanted to widen the roads and we put in these larger roads, what do we do with the landowners? They might not have a lease, but we're going to take their property away over eminent domain, or how are we going to do this in the first place? We could end up with all these roads, and then what happens a few years down the road when the well's no longer any good? Or like they did in Pennsylvania recently, and the price of gas went down, and they all just pulled the heck out of there. Okay, so there we are, we're stuck with a road that we have to maintain that leads to nowheres now. It really does. So that's a major problem that we have. And with this extra traffic means extra accidents. Now you have trucks carrying hazardous materials that we don't even know. We're not allowed to know what those materials are. But we're supposed to have trained people there. And you have to remember, the people that are first responders are mostly volunteers. We have volunteer fire departments and rescue squads. You know, they have fundraisers, they try to come up with their own money. They don't have the money to do this, and they won't have the training to do this. Unfortunately, the DEC has not answered or taken into consideration any of these things in the regulations. So what I see is we have a disaster about ready to happen. And I thank you for your opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. President Whitesell, you talked about local government participation in the process. So let me just ask you, reasonably speaking, what would you consider to be participation? Is that consultation? Is that veto authority? Is that, Ms. Lifton has a bill with local zoning authority? What would you consider to be adequate local government participation in this whole process?
We would be looking at having some kind of a voice at the table with DEC in regard to the transportation studies, anything that has a direct correlation or impact on local government that is what could potentially be an oversight on DEC's part, that we at the local level have a much more grounded root to our issues.
Okay, thank you. DEC's regulatory analysis for small business and local government, I'm going to quote, it says, "These revised rules will not have substantial adverse effects on small businesses and local governments." Safe to say you don't agree with that, for the record. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you don't agree. Their job impact analysis indicates, again I'm quoting, "The proposed revised rules themselves will not negatively affect employment opportunities, and the activities guided by the proposed revised rules will create jobs," unquote. This is an area that personally I think hasn't gotten adequate attention, but as local government officials, I think you probably have some handle on the whole economic employment opportunity issue. Would you accept their job impact analysis that the revised rules will create jobs and employment opportunities?
Are you asking, will the industry create jobs?
Well, let me quote you again, DEC's job impact analysis. "The proposed revised rules themselves will not negatively affect employment opportunities, and the activities guided by the proposed revised rules will create jobs." Do you believe that's the case in the area that you represent?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Anyone else?
Very much so.
Different?
I disagree, because all they looked at was positive effects as far as employment and jobs in general. Let's take this consideration. In my town, tourism is a big thing. I have 2 large resorts. Now, who's going to want to come up to the traffic, the noise, the smell, and all that to stay at our resorts? It's going to hurt our resort industry. Another factor that they really didn't look at, in my town, approximately 40% of the residences of our homes in town are second homeowners. Okay? They come up for a reason, for peace, quiet, tranquility, no traffic, no noise, the lights and all that. This is going to have a negative impact. The DEC didn't look at negative impacts when they went to that. They only went at jobs created by that. They didn't look at the minus jobs. And you have to look at both sides of the coin.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
My name is Gerald Geist. I'm the
You need to turn on, hit that button there to turn on. Oh.
I'm sorry, sir.
Okay,
Thank
there
you.
you
Mr. Chairman, my name is Gerald Geist. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Towns of New York State. And I just want to reiterate that the Association of Towns on the economic question, we haven't done enough studies on that. We have a myriad of local governments we represent, and we focused on our issues today regarding the roads, and also very important, the first responders and the emergency related activities. As most of us heard yesterday about the governor's understanding of the need of quick, immediate, important information to first responders. Many of us are volunteers. We need to be the first people on site, and these regulations do not provide us any input or any information on how to respond to a situation in our communities. And so from the Association of Towns perspective, we want to be able to be part of the process, be part of the information, so that we can best protect not only our first responders, but the health and safety and welfare of everyone in our communities.
Thank you. Questions? Mr. Godfrey.
Couple questions. One is, has the Association of Towns talked with the Association of Counties and the Conference of Mayors about your concerns, and where do they stand, if you know?
For the record, I'm Michael Keely. I'm an attorney with the Association of Towns. And we have worked with the Association of Counties and the Conference of Mayors on isolated issues as they have been, as they have come up. We are not qualified to speak on their viewpoints on these regulations or on the issue as a whole altogether. So, but we do work with them on issues that are of mutual interest as they do arise.
Because I would think if you were able to bring them into this debate along the lines of the Association of Towns positions, that would be a potent coalition. What is your understanding of the zoning and land use authority that towns have in relation to drilling operations? I know there has been litigation on that point. How does that stand at this point?
Well, as of now, you have 3 Supreme Court decisions that have upheld the rights of local communities to adopt zoning regulations that would pertain to the oil and gas industry, natural gas drilling in specific.
This is State Supreme Court.
New York State Supreme Court, correct. They are currently being appealed to the 3rd Department. The Association of Towns, our core mission is to promote home rule, and when you look at the provisions of the Environmental Conservation Law, we do have the authority to adopt local laws on all matters that do not relate to the regulation of the oil and gas industry. Those that do relate to the oil and gas industry are reserved to the state. Now, that might seem like a neat categorization in statute. In practice, it doesn't work out that way. When you look at it in practice, you have all of these issues that you've heard about today. You take the noise and light considerations. Well, most of these towns do have noise ordinances, and they do have local laws about light protection. Well, in this context, it also relates to the oil and gas industry. So I think what you're going to see, as we are seeing now in the land use context, as this process goes on, there will certainly be more debate, more discussion about what actions of the local governments will relate to the regulation of the industry and are preempted, and what are properly reserved to the local government to exercise in their, to utilize their home rule authority to exercise and protect the health, safety, and welfare of their community. And I think that certainly the regulations would provide an opportunity if you can get local government involved in the process. And as these issues come up, get them involved in developing the transportation plans, get them involved, get them access to the emergency response plans, get them to address some of the setbacks and the noise and light pollution issues that are of specific concern to the community, not generic to the state. Then you could address many of these issues before they reach litigation.
Thank you.
Mr. Avenatti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. As a relatively new legislator now in my 2nd term, I spent 25 years in local government in the county of Westchester, where Mr. Geist served as a town councilman for many years, and in the town of Greenburgh in the county of Westchester. So I appreciate your concerns. I hear, I guess, 3 things from your comments today. Number 1, in the guise of economic development, the state is establishing another mandate on local governments, an unfunded mandate, because you will now have to care for an industry and provide the infrastructure for that industry without necessarily being reimbursed to the extent of the cost. I'm hearing, number 2, that there are some negative impacts that you can all agree to. And I'm hearing, number 3, that there's a danger in the state of making rules and regulations for all, when in many cases, it turns out that there are even more negative impacts. Having been in local government, I understand the disagreements. Some policies will make things better for some towns. Some policies will make things worse for some towns. But there are some policies that you all agree here are going to be bad, and there's a disagreement over whether there's going to be a positive impact at all or whatever. Is that a fair analysis of what you're saying?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah. Thank you for your input.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Thank you.
For being here. And we've also been joined